So next we have Simon Parkin, who is a journalist and head of games at LittleLoud, and he's going to talk about Sweatshop, a web-based game that was commissioned by Channel 4 to encourage young people to think about the origins of the clothes that we buy. Within 3 months, they had secured over 1 million plays. So Simon's going to talk a little bit about insights into the making of the game and lessons he learned about why it worked.
Hey. Hello everyone, I hope you're doing all right. So, I wanted to start with an apology really. This kind of title card up here, Inside the Sweatshop, Unpicking the Seams of a Best Practice Serious Game. That is the name of a session from a man who is trying too hard. I've got to admit, you know, I was kind of tired when I put this together and kind of overreaching a little bit, trying to convince the organisers to invite us along to talk. But there are lots of things that are irritating about that title there. I mean, it uses best practice, which, you know, just uses serious game. Even having kind of the inverted commas, that really doesn't excuse the use of serious game, which is one of the worst terms we've ever used. Games for Change is a much better term, so I should have said that. So apologies for that. But I think the reason that I've kind of gone this way and trying to overreach is because the Sweatshop's a game that I really believe in very much. I've worked on 3 kind of Games for Change with LittleLoud, which is a boutique indie developer in Brighton on the south coast of England. The first one, Bow Street Runner, won a BAFTA in the UK, and the second one, The Curfew, won a Games for Change award last year. And Sweatshop, while it hasn't won any awards, I think is, you know, from I'm trying to stand back and have a more kind of objective look at it. I think it's probably the most successful of the 3 in terms of achieving its aims that I wanted for the game. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about this morning, is just how we got that, and then also maybe some of the things that went wrong as well, so it's not quite all boasting. So I thought just to start with, I'll show you the trailer, so for those of you who haven't played the game, get a good idea of what it's all about. So let's do that. Okay, so Sweatshop, how far would you go to avoid a fashion disaster? So for the purposes of kind of this talk, we've got all kinds of definitions of what a video game is, but today I want to use this definition here, which is games are comprised of a series of answers to a series of questions, which is a definition that I'm really into at the moment. So to kind of give you an idea of what I mean by that, say you might ask the game Super Mario World, can Mario jump? And then from that answer, you then might ask the question, how high can Mario jump? And then you might ask, can Mario jump higher if he's sprinting? Does he jump higher than if he's standing still? Or then you might say, what happens when Mario bumps his head when he jumps into the ceiling? And as you start to gather those answers to those questions, your game starts to take shape. Yeah, it starts to, you get a picture of the game that you're kind of excavating. So the answers are important, but I believe that the questions that you ask your game are even more important, because if you fail to ask your game the right questions, then you're kind of providing answers without really realizing it, without thinking through what you're doing. So yeah, I believe that asking the best questions of your game is the only way to make it the best game that it can be. So what I wanted to take us through was 10 questions that I asked Sweatshop that I believe kind of helped to make it a good game, and then through those questions that I asked, maybe you'll get some ideas for what questions to ask the games that you're working on. So the first question is one that any game designer has to ask his or her game when they start making it, which is, how can I make you? Games involve a huge amount of time and energy and money, and so that's the most fundamental question, is how am I going to make you? Is it going to be in my spare time in my bedroom, or is it going to be something that's funded by a publisher? Do I need a big team? Is it just going to be 2 of us? All of those kind of things. And then for me, I had a supplementary question to that, a 1B. So how can I make a tower defense game? Now, tower defense games, it's one of the youngest genres in video games. It's been around for kind of less than 10 years, I'd say. Originally was a Warcraft 3 mod, and basically the tower defense genre, if I can explain it, is you would perhaps see a top-down view of a map, and then in one side of the kind of map you get some little enemies walking in, and they're trying to get to your base on the other side, and you have to plant towers that will automatically shoot at the enemies as they go across. Now, it's one of the most popular genres on iOS and Android at the moment. It's kind of very saturated type of game style. But I kind of really like strategy games, and I was interested in how I could make an interesting tower defense game, because it was so oversaturated, but I believe that there's kind of more stuff that we could get out of it. So to answer these kind of 3 questions all wrapped together, we talked to Channel 4, which is a public service broadcaster in the UK, which I'm sure many of you have heard about. They have an educational department there that has a certain amount of budget to fund games with an educational element. And every year, over the past 3 or 4 years, every year, the channel has gathered together game makers, independent studios, to give them some themes for games that they would like us to make for them. So I was at the briefing with Channel 4, and they were listing the themes that they were after, and one of them was fashion, that they said. Now, fashion is not really the type of game that you would think would naturally fit the tower defense genre. But for me, I wanted to come at it from this way around. I wanted to go, well, actually, I want to make a tower defense game. The theme is kind of secondary at this point. Which of these themes is going to fit? And as I was thinking about fashion, I was thinking about the actual kind of a factory layout that you might have, and thinking, actually, that's highly analogous to a tower defense game, right? Because you have kind of a conveyor belt running through your factory with items of clothing coming through, and your towers, if we're going to kind of dehumanize them for a minute, are your workers, who basically, when the pieces of clothing come into their area of effect, will start creating the clothing, and then it makes it to the end. And if they fail to complete their clothes as they go past, then it kind of reaches the end, and I guess knocks off health points, if that makes sense, using the tower defense kind of mechanic there to explain that. So I was thinking, right, that's kind of a natural, the system of the system of a Sweatshop is kind of exactly almost a one-to-one mapping to a tower defense game. So my next question I asked was, how might Nintendo make a game about industrial scale child abuse? And this kind of image really sums up my hope for the game, which was, well, kind of my thinking was, when you say, this happens quite regularly, if I tell people that, oh yeah, I worked in a game about sweatshops, they're kind of repelled by that idea. Because the subject matter is bleak, it's difficult, it's horrible, it's potentially preachy, and all these things that you naturally think, why should you be making a game about that? Well, not everyone thinks that, but people that kind of see games as toys for children would think things like that. So I was thinking, well, how can we balance that to kind of make it almost draw people in so they don't feel like they're going to get a lecture, but also kind of enjoy the things that are naturally compelling about games. So Nintendo values playfulness, humour, accessibility, and elegant learning, and I thought these could be real anchors for the kind of sweatshop dynamic to help it, and to help kind of sweeten the message kind of thing. which led me to the next question, which is how might we avoid a sermon? I think one of the problems with Games for Change in general is that they can be kind of pretty didactic, and you're trying to like shove a message that everyone sort of knows what the message is going to be before they even start playing the game, right? So if you kind of say to a group of people, here, I've made a game about sweatshops, it's sort of educational, then they're going to go, okay, well, I think I know how this ends. You're going to say sweatshops are a bad thing, right? As kind of in my work as a journalist, I thought, why not try and approach this like a journalist rather than a campaigner? And the reason to do that, and for that kind of approach, is I think we instinctively know that sweatshops are a bad thing. Hearing that again in and of itself isn't really interesting. The more interesting question is probably a journalistic one, which would be the why. Now, I think the why of a sweatshop is a really interesting question because I've got a belief in humanity that we rarely deliberately want to hurt one another. Now, there are exceptions to the rule, obviously, but really on a one-to-one, when you've got another human being sitting across from you, you generally don't want to hurt them, right? So what are the forces that have brought about the sweatshop system on our planet, right? What forces, what systems have created this institution? And do you know, it's one that a lot of us will participate in if you shop at Walmart or Urban Outfitters or any of the kind of high street retailers in the UK, such as Topman and Henny's, and these places will kind of use sweatshops. So we're kind of a part of that system one way or another. So how's that come about? What are the forces that have made that happen? That's interesting. That's our next question, right, in making this game. The next question is, who am I going to play as? I'm going to race through this a little bit fast because I'm slow. So, if I want to get that across, if I want to get that kind of more balanced view of where did the sweatshop come through, it's really important to figure out who I'm going to play as. So, and then tied to that question is, what is my purpose going to be? If your purpose in running, if you're going to say, right, we're going to make a tower defense game and it's kind of like a sweatshop, and the idea is that you have to fulfill all your orders and be an excellent capitalist, right? That's kind of the natural purpose of what you're doing if you're running a sweatshop. So the next question to come from that is my game creating industrial supervillains? Because you're essentially teaching people how to be really good at kind of running something that's pretty awful. This leads on to the next thing of that positioning. Who do I play as? How am I going to get that balance? How am I going to try and get some more messages across that get you to think about the why? Now, kind of in good game design, the current understanding is that your story and your systems always have to be aligned to give players the same message. In fact, if they're in conflict, that's usually seen as a bad thing. We have a word for that called ludonarrative dissonance, which if you go to GDC, you'll hear people endlessly talking about. Now, to give you an example of what that is, say you might be in a first-person shooter game and you're in a cutscene talking to another character, and the character's like, come on, the police are coming, we've got to get out of here, we've got to move really quickly, let's go through the store, let's sprint. And so the game's story is telling you that you really need to hurry up, but the systems are kind of saying, well, you need to wait till this cutscene's finished, and we're going to just listen to what the lady's saying. And so they're in conflict with one another, right? Now, in Sweatshop, I thought, why don't we try something where we've got the story and the systems actually in conflict with one another in order to help understand both Sweatshop owners and Sweatshop workers. So the way that we kind of went about achieving this is that the game mechanics are kind of implicitly asking you to excel at making profits. And we built in loads of kind of game mechanics to facilitate that. So you can cut corners, you can hire children, you can lay off injured workers, all these things that make you more proficient at creating clothing and kind of winning the game, I guess. And for the first kind of 10 levels, the game's really about teaching you how to do that, how to be kind of an excellent industrial supervillain. But as the story progresses, you start to see the human cost of your choices. So the position that we put the player in was one of a middle manager. So you've got your kind of boss, who's the sweatshop factory owner in the cutscenes. He's kind of saying, come on, you've got to get rid of the people who are injured. Let's not install toilets. Let's not give people breaks. You can't give them unions. All of this stuff that's really kind of based in fact. We worked with a charity in the UK called Labour Behind the Label that was telling us kind of what the big issues are in sweatshops right now. And so we kind of mechanised those things. But then you also kind of start to see, because the other character kind of in the narrative is a boy, he's called Boy, he's the little guy there who's asleep at the moment on that screen. And he's kind of the one who's working for his family, and you get to see his side of the story. So kind of what we found is a lot of players would have this kind of crisis about midway through the game where they were like, oh my gosh, what have I become? Kind of, I'm doing all this stuff to make the clothes very successful, to make this sweatshop very successful, to give us bigger premises so we can fulfill more orders. But you're starting to see the human cost of what comes along with that. So by placing players in a role where they can appreciate both the systemic pressures of running a sweatshop and also the human cost of the choices, the conflict before the story and the systems reveals truths about the sweatshop dilemma. So that's kind of, I don't know, one of the few examples I've seen of using leader narrative dissonance kind of in an interesting way to give you some learnings. Let's rush to the end because I've got 10 seconds. So the final question, this is not really a question that I was asking of my game, but it's one that everyone needs to ask after your game's out is, did it work? How's it gone? And the game has been very successful online. We've had many, many players. We've had lots of stories written about it as well because it's quite kind of, the subject matter is kind of a good thing to latch onto for journalists. So it spread really well. And these are some of the quotations that we had written in the comments of the kind of on Congregate and places like that. So I feel bad realising that this isn't a game for many people out there. People work desperately to make a livelihood doing exactly what the workers in this game are doing. We had people saying that they were in tears, that they had an uncle who worked in a sweatshop, and kind of it brought up loads of interesting things for them as well as quite painful things at times. I've intentionally killed people in games, but this is the only game that makes me feel guilty for keeping them alive. And I think one of the best kind of endorsements we had of the game is we had a journalist from a newspaper in the UK come and talk to us, and she also does work with kind of buyers at shops in the UK, and she has started using the game when training buyers at Marks and Spencer's to kind of alert them to some of the wider issues around, things to look out for when they're looking for partners for who's going to make their clothes. Okay, so I've run out of time, so thanks for having me. I hope some of that was helpful.